Thanks so much to Charlie Hurd. I hope we kicked off your week just right.
Oh, couldn't have been better. Thank you.
Do you think it's going to be a politically mellow and stable week?
Oh, no, it's going to be a
Is that such a thing? I don't know. Wishful thinking, I guess. All right. Great to see everyone. And so great to see Harris. We are back at noon Eastern tomorrow. Right now, here's Harris back in action.
Fox News Alert, Rudy Giuliani stepping up his attacks on the Russia investigation. Let's go outnumbered overtime. I'm Harris Faulkner. One of the president's newest legal hires, again, is making waves. Giuliani saying he would not rule out President Trump taking the fifth, and that the president would not have to comply with a subpoena from Robert Mueller.
And assert the same privileges other presidents have? I wouldn't be an attorney if I did that, George. I'd be living in some kind of unreal fantasy world that everybody tells the truth. I'm not going to accept. They don't have a case on collusion. They don't have a case on obstruction.
But Democratic Congressman Jim Himes, a frequent Trump critic, says the president cannot refuse a Mueller subpoena.
That's completely wrong, and I mean, as a matter of law, this has never been tested, but it's also not in question. I mean, Nixon was forced to produce the tapes by a court, and of course, Bill Clinton, in the litigation surrounding his case, was compelled to participate in a civil, not a criminal, but a civil case. So no, the idea that the president would have to, could be subpoenaed is not open to question.
Let's go to White House correspondent Kevin Corke on the North Lawn. Kevin?
Harris, good afternoon. What Himes said there at the very end is incredibly important. He said, as a matter of law, this has never been tested. And so what we don't know is, A, whether or not Mueller will, in fact, try to subpoena the president, and we don't know, B, what the courts might say moving forward. Obviously, from the White House's perspective, they would simply take this all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. But what we do know is that the president, Harris, has been quite forceful in his criticism of the Mueller team for having among its members anti-Trump partisans and worse, operating far afield from its original mandate. The president once again on his favorite social media platform on Twitter today saying the following: 13 angry Democrats in charge of the Russia witch hunt are starting to find out that there is a court system in place that actually protects people from injustice, and just wait till the courts get to see your unrevealed conflicts of interest. He also added this one, Harris, I think you'll find it interesting. He asked the question, is this phony witch hunt going to go on even longer so it wrongfully impacts the midterm elections, which is what the Democrats always intended? Republicans better get tough and smart before it's too late. The president's lawyers, meanwhile, as you saw, hitting the airwaves over the weekend, responding to, among other questions, whether or not the president will in fact sit down with Mr. Mueller, and if so, will he talk?
Are you confident the president will not take the fifth in this case?
Oh, how can I ever be confident of that? When I'm facing a situation with the president and all the other lawyers are, in which every lawyer in America thinks he'd be a fool to testify, I've got a client who wants to testify. Please don't. He said it yesterday. And, you know, Jay and I said to ourselves, my goodness, I hope we get a chance to tell him the risks that he's taking. So he may testify.
He may testify, but then again, he may not. That is certain to be among the questions posed to the press secretary, Sarah Sanders. That one coming up at 2 o'clock this afternoon should make for, once again, Harris, a very interesting briefing. But for now, back to you.
All right, Kevin Corke, thank you very much. Congressman Ron DeSantis sits on the House Judiciary Committee. The Florida Republican is also a former Navy JAG officer. Great to see you today. You know, my first question has to be, and it isn't whether or not the president should sit down, but where we are in just negotiating any kind of a sit-down. What do you think?
Well, I disagree with Congressman Himes. It's not settled that the president can be subpoenaed for any reason at all. And this is different than what Bill Clinton sat for. It's different than the Nixon tapes. What Mueller is purporting to do is potentially subpoena the president to conduct oversight over the president's use of his Article II powers. Mueller, being an inferior officer in the executive branch, so it raises huge separation of powers questions, and I'm not at all sure that the court would ultimately force the president to answer questions under those specific circumstances. So I don't think he should be, I would not be willing to go in, or I would advise him not to go in to do it, given that they don't have an underlying case on any of this. So to me, there's really no upside. There's no case as it is now. If you go in and testify and they trip you up on something, what are then they going to try to use that for?
What about pleading the fifth or taking the fifth?
You know, the thing is usually when people say, oh, you plead the fifth, it means that you're guilty, you're hiding something. And I think generally that's true. But in this case, if there's no underlying case in normal society, the people then don't get brought in and subpoenaed if there's no underlying crime. So this would be kind of an extraordinary use of government questioning. And so I think taking the fifth under those circumstances is just much different than what you would normally see in normal situations.
You know, Congressman DeSantis, there has been some talk about how long the White House and its team have waited to come with this much bravado. Do you see it that way?
I think that they started off with the view of, hey, there's nothing here, so let's just give this guy everything they want. They turned over huge numbers of documents. They didn't assert executive privilege, which they probably could have at a lot of this. And I think they wanted this to end soon. But I think the way it's gone is it's clear that this is not just a good faith effort to find something, and if it's not there, move on. They're going to keep digging until they find something beyond collusion, whatever they can find. And so the posture change, I think, makes sense.
What is the conversation like on the House Judiciary Committee about bringing things to a halt and any way that your committee would interject or intervene?
I think there's a division amongst the Republicans. I've been somebody, I wanted to conduct oversight over Mueller from the beginning. We have had Rod Rosenstein, the deputy AG, once. I think we need to have him again. I mean, Harris, just think of the recent news in these courts. You have one federal judge slapping them down for bringing these Manafort charges, which are totally unrelated. And then over the weekend, you had the judge say, sorry, Mueller, we're not going to give you an extension. They wanted an extension to prosecute the Russian bots case. They're not ready to bring the case. So there's a huge number of questions, I think, just over the last week that have been raised about this operation.
You know, the president has made some changes over time to his legal team. Rudy Giuliani is a different type of person because he can argue a case and he can argue a case in public, which sometimes can be very different. What do you think he brings to the table now in terms of this investigation?
I think he brings skill, I think he brings experience, and he brings a relationship with Robert Mueller. He was Mueller's superior back in the 80s, and so
yes.
I think Rudy is the man for the job, and I think he's going to probably help engineer a positive outcome in this case.
Do you see, before I let you go, Congressman, do you see any advantage or any strategy, any way that the president would sit down with Robert Mueller and not have it be, as Giuliani describes it, a trap?
Well, what Rudy said this weekend, if he gets the Hillary treatment, no under oath, no anything, you just kind of sit in and shoot the breeze for an hour, hour and a half, well, then that may be one thing. But I doubt that Bob Mueller would be willing to give Donald Trump the Hillary Clinton treatment.
Congressman DeSantis of the great state of Florida, thank you.
Thank you.
Meanwhile, Rudy Giuliani says he is pleased with this media blitz and that the president would agree. The former mayor and federal prosecutor told the Washington Post this: "We all feel pretty good that we've got everything kind of straightened out here, and we're setting the agenda. Everybody's reacting to us now, and I feel good about that because that's what I came to do." James Freeman is assistant editor for the Wall Street Journal's editorial page. He's also a Fox News contributor and someone we like to bring in at these times. And great to see you, James.
Thank you. I like to be here.
So as we look at where we are now, we still don't know all of what Mueller has or where he's going, but we're getting a taste of what he would want to talk with the president about. How does Rudy Giuliani figure into this?
And what we're seeing, we're getting a taste of how broad the scope is. And I think maybe the value that Rudy Giuliani adds, among other things, is that he is willing to challenge the scope and the authority and really the breadth of this investigation.
Right. Okay, so a light bulb goes on over my head. We talked about this last hour on Outnumbered. Now we can pull the pieces together. And where have we heard the idea of show me the scope letter from the Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein in the Paul Manafort case? And you might say he saw a victory in that. Are they learning from, are Giuliani and the rest learning from what they're seeing?
Yeah, I think that was significant to say exactly how broad is this authority, what are you going after here? And you know, it raises big questions that go to the heart of the special counsel's job to begin with. The reason for a special counsel under the law is supposed to be when there's a conflict of interest in a criminal matter. But to this day, there's no crime. It was a counterintelligence investigation. So I think these kind of bigger questions, along with the question of the president's authority, as Mr. DeSantis was mentioning, these are the kind of things that I think Rudy is eager to challenge, maybe more than the traditional professional legal representation that Mr. Trump previously had.
Yeah, so this federal judge, C.S. Ellis III, has looked at the Manafort case and said, look, you say that there's a scope letter that says that it narrows the scope or it dictates the scope, how wide or not, that they can look into Paul Manafort. Does then Rudy Giuliani stand ground to ask for something similar from Robert Mueller?
I think he is asking that question, and even beyond Mueller. I think
Does he get it?
He's questioning the what's now the U.S. Attorney's prosecution related to Michael Cohen and Stormy Daniels in New York. And I think the question there is, wow, these are really aggressive tactics of raiding the lawyer's office, the disclosure of your colleague's name seeming for no public purpose.
Well, the raid has been refuted, you know, the no-knock and all of that. But the point of the matter is that they did show up.
Yeah,
you know,
with the Manafort
absolutely,
case.
They did show up. So I want to ask you next, too, you brought up Stormy Daniels and all of that. Do you think the American public really is clear on why that case even had to happen?
No, and I know it was maybe awkward in this weekend in Mr. Giuliani's presentation, but I think there is an underlying problem there, which is no matter how you look at it, reimbursed, wasn't reimbursed.
Right.
It is a real reach to say that this is an in-kind contribution in a campaign setting. This is new legal ground. The only other real test case for this theory, it failed in 2011.
Interesting.
So whoever it turns out paid for this or reimbursed this payment, it really doesn't go to campaign finance violations under a traditional reading of the law. And I think it underlines how far afield this investigation has gotten.
So, James, following that logic and those facts, then maybe Rudy Giuliani knew exactly what he was doing. And it may have looked absolutely bonkers to the rest of the world, because if you read social media, that's what people thought. But it does take it out of that area of in-kind campaign contributions. Your thought?
Yeah, I think it kind of takes that off the table, and you know,
that's interesting.
This is high-stakes poker he's playing. Obviously, you look at some of these interviews where it's all about alleged behavior that is not admirable, and you can say, how is that a good media moment for the president or for Giuliani? But I think to the extent that they're able to say that these things are not illegal, as embarrassing as they might be, that perhaps could be a good day for him.
I noticed the word crime never came up, and the way you described it was a bad media moment with regard to this. That is really interesting, because the other part that Giuliani plays is a PR part in all of this. James Freeman, it's always great to have you from the Wall Street Journal editorial board. Thank you.
Good to be here.
European leaders are stepping up the pressure on President Trump not to pull out of the Iran nuclear deal, with a deadline fast approaching. This as Iran signals it would be willing to stay in the deal even if the U.S. backs out. We'll have a live report ahead. President Trump's CIA director pick, Gina Haspel, facing growing scrutiny ahead of her Senate confirmation hearing. Sources say she even offered to withdraw her nomination. What can we expect to happen on Wednesday? We'll talk with a national security expert. You stay close.
This is about politics. This is nothing more than them trying to undermine this process and just take a scalp, so to speak. She's very qualified. She's risen up the ranks.
We come in with this Fox News alert. President Trump is defending his CIA director nominee, Gina Haspel, after sources say she offered to withdraw her nomination just days ahead of her confirmation hearing. That happens on Wednesday, by the way. This comes amid concerns over her connection to the CIA's interrogation program set after the 9/11 attacks. The president tweeted this: "My highly respected nominee for CIA director, Gina Haspel, has come under fire because she was too tough on terrorists." Think of that. In these very dangerous times, we have the most qualified person, a woman who Democrats want out because she is too tough on terror. Win, Gina! Exclamation point. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge is live for us in Washington with the latest. Catherine?
Well, thanks, Harris. A source familiar with the matter tells Fox News the CIA nominee had concerns about the confirmation process. given her clandestine background and association with the post-9/11 interrogation program. Haspel said she was willing to withdraw, but the discussions were not described to Fox News as serious. Meantime, a CIA spokesman says the Haspel nomination is going ahead, and those who know her say Wednesday's confirmation hearing should not focus on a decade-old program that was approved under the Bush administration. Instead, it should focus on Haspel's credentials and fitness for the job.
With a president who does not always attach his decisions to the real world, to data, to evidence, Gina Haspel is the one woman I want in that room when everyone else will be going into north-south Autobahn and saying, "You're right, boss." Gina Haspel won't.
Fox News understands that Haspel will be on the Hill about 2 hours from now to meet with 3 Democrats in a secure facility, including Dianne Feinstein, who sits on both the Senate Intelligence and Senate Judiciary committees. She led an investigation into the CIA program, and it became so acrimonious that Democrats accused the CIA of spying on Senate investigators. Haspel is also expected to meet with Senators Heinrich and Manchin. The ACLU told Fox on Friday that even a minimal support role in the controversial interrogation program that included the waterboarding of self-described architect of 9/11 Khalid Sheikh Mohammed disqualifies her.
The biggest concern we have with her is that in the entire history of the United States Senate, as far as we know, the Senate has never confirmed somebody with an operational role in the use of torture. That would be a first. It's a new low for the country if she gets confirmed.
Senator Rand Paul has come out against the nominee and told Fox late last week that at that time there were still no plans to meet before the hearing on Wednesday. Harris.
Catherine, thank you very much. We appreciate you racking up those facts ahead of my next guest. Matthew Hyman, a former lawyer at the Justice Department's National Security Division, who's now a fellow at George Mason University. Great to see you today. I want to start off with what is in bounds for this hearing on Wednesday with regard to Gina Haspel's confirmation.
Well, I think they should be focusing on her credentials. I think they should focus on her 30-plus year tenure, the senior posts she's held throughout the CIA, the fact that she's been decorated many times by various presidents. That should be the meat of what the discussion is this week when it comes to her candidacy to be the director of the CIA.
You know, Matthew, there are questions about the black sites and interrogation, and those same questions came up for John Brennan, who was 4th in command. So how should Wednesday look any different than it looked for him? Take us back.
I don't think it should look any different than it did for him, and I don't think the outcome should be any different than it was for him. Obviously, he was confirmed. I believe he received 66 votes in favor of his confirmation, and that to me is the shame of this process. Is we've got Gina Haspel, who is lower in the ranks than John Brennan was at the time of these programs, and she's been held to a higher standard, which to me seems very odd, especially given her incredible career, her experience in dealing with Russia, her experience in dealing with terrorism. That's exactly the kind of person we need at the CIA today.
So just to revisit with John Brennan's case, he was asked about this, though, correct?
Yes, he was asked about it.
And so you would anticipate that Gina Haspel would be asked about this and that she would have readily, to-go answers, I would imagine.
I would expect so.
Okay.
And
just moving ahead with Gina Haspel, and you're talking about her credentials and all of that, do you think it's kind of understandable, Matthew, why people are backing out of this process? I mean, this is tough. We've seen a lot of people, we've got reports that she considered withdrawing. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it speaks to the hyper-partisan environment we're in, where partisanship and political point scoring seem to come far ahead of facts and what's best for the country and finding qualified people to take up these posts. And I think that's a shame because obviously we need our best and brightest at these highest levels. Gina Haspel's an example of that. And I think the fact that she, at least according to the reports, gave some thought to stepping back from this process is reflective of her humility, her desire to ensure that the CIA is not a political football, to ensure that the CIA can have an effective leader. And so I think it's a shame that we're going through this process. I think it's shameful that she's having to endure this process. I'm hopeful that enough senators will come to their senses and recognize what an asset she can be to the country. And as your clip showed with General Hayden, the former director of both the CIA and the NSA, she's a person that's all about facts and data, and that's exactly the kind of advice we want our president to get.
President says that she's tough on terror and that it's disingenuous, I'm paraphrasing him now, for Democrats to push against that. Does Gina Haspel get confirmed on Wednesday?
I think she ultimately does. I'm confident that she will get the confirmation. As I said, though, I think it's a shame that she's got to go through this process to get there when she is so eminently qualified.
All right. Matthew Hyman, former attorney for the DOJ's National Security Division, we appreciate your perspective and expertise today. Thank you.
Thank you.
House Intelligence Chairman Devin Nunes says he is going to urge lawmakers to hold Attorney General Jeff Sessions in contempt of Congress for failing to hand over classified information on the Russia investigation. But the Justice Department says they need to protect our national security. Do they have a point? Or are they stonewalling? And days ahead of President Trump's expected decision on whether to abandon the Iran nuclear deal, the UK's top diplomat is in Washington for talks with the administration. So what will the president decide to do? Stay close. Iranian President Hassan Rouhani says his country would be willing to stay in the nuclear deal even if the United States pulls out. That's providing the European Union offers guarantees that Iran would continue to benefit from it. His comments come just days ahead of President Trump's expected decision on whether to abandon the Iran nuclear deal. Meanwhile, the UK's top diplomat, Boris Johnson, is in Washington, D.C. for talks with the Trump administration about Iran this week. He spoke earlier on Fox and Friends.
Of course, the president is right to see flaws in it, and he said a very reasonable challenge to the world was, look, Iran is behaving badly. Iran has a tendency to develop intercontinental ballistic missiles. We've got to stop that. But you've got to do that without just throwing the baby out with the bathwater, without scrapping the whole thing. Because if you do that, you have to answer the question, what next?
Benjamin Hall is live from Jerusalem. Benjamin?
Yeah, hi, Harris. Well, only 5 days left till President Trump has to make that decision on whether to recertify the deal, and already pressure mounting across the world. And the Iranians coming out and saying that the U.S. would pay a heavy price if they didn't do just that. But there was a slightly more mild tone from them today, with President Rouhani, as you said, coming out and saying that Iran would consider not abandoning the deal if the U.S. did indeed pull out. That, of course, only as long as the European Union could offer guarantees that Iran would continue to benefit from the accord. And that's all in contrast to the other pressure campaigns going on at the moment, which highlight the threat posed both by Iran and this nuclear deal, which President Trump has called insane. Most visibly, that was Benjamin Netanyahu's presentation just last week, highlighting exactly how Iran had lied about the extent of its program. And, of course, pressure, as you say, from across the pond. First, remember, there was Emmanuel Macron, then it was Merkel with today, British Foreign Minister Boris Johnson also in D.C., meeting with Ambassador Bolton and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, lending his support for staying in the deal. And all this as news was breaking in Israel today that intelligence suggests Iran now have plans to attack Israel soon. That's in retaliation for Israeli strikes. Officials say that Iran is determined to retaliate for the April 9th airstrike on an airbase in Syria, which killed 7 Iranian military advisors and members of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards. Israel also saying that it has detected unusual involvement by Hezbollah in Iran's preparation for any sort of retaliation, even though that organization has been trying to keep its activity low profile so it doesn't affect its own position in the region. So on the one side, you've got the nuclear deal, and you've got people trying to force the president to maybe stay in that, but regional activities here are also heating up, and Israel very concerned about Iranian encroachment on its own borders. And remember that Prime Minister Netanyahu said some time ago he would never allow Iran to become a power on these borders. And so we're seeing multiple different things at play here, and there are fears of a direct military confrontation now between Israel and Iran.
Yeah, and Netanyahu, not just some time ago, like last week. I mean, they talk about this constantly. Right. That is an interesting development. I'm going to bring it up now with my next guest, Benjamin Hall. Thank you very much. His reporting excellent there. Harry Kazianis, Director of Defense Studies at the Center for the National Interest. This is troubling because you have to take regional concerns into the whole vision here. Where does this put the United States? I mean, our president is strong on this issue. If Israel is in further danger, what happens next?
Well, Harris, I have a good idea that the Iran deal is probably dead. I think the only question here is what date to actually stamp on the tombstone. I think the Trump administration has been pretty clear from really since the campaign that this isn't a deal that they like. And it's pretty obvious why they don't like it. In fact, Boris Johnson today probably made the case on Fox and Friends why we should leave the deal.
Exactly.
I mean, the sunset provisions, essentially Iran gets to leave the deal in 2025. And don't think for a second that Iran's going to try and renegotiate some new deal then. I think what they're going to do is they're probably going to sprint to build nuclear weapons for the same reasons the North Koreans have nuclear weapons, because it guarantees their security. And I think also the Iranians were very smart in the deal to make sure that there's no restrictions on the ability for them to build missiles. Don't think for a second that the Iranians aren't probably getting technology from the North Koreans that they could buy to build ICBMs and then mate them with a nuclear weapon in the future. So I think all this is just really fake news and fake debate. That the deal is dead.
You know, it's so interesting because I watched that interview with Boris Johnson, and I kind of had a very similar takeaway as you're describing, that he was kind of enumerating why we should exit the deal. Harry, do you think it's kind of been already factored in Europe that, hey, the United States is going to step away, and that's why we heard from Rouhani today that, you know, maybe we would consider staying in the deal even if the United States exits?
I think so. And I mean, Rouhani and the Europeans could have their own side deal or something like that. But I think what we have to remember, Harris, it's the United States that's the one who really has the ball in its court. If we decide to scrap the deal and we impose sanctions on the Iranians again, I think the Iranians really have to be careful here. There already is a lot of pressure on their economy. They're already under, you know, intense domestic problems. They've had a number of different riots and challenges over the last few months. In fact, there's more riots today in different parts of the country. People are very upset about wages, about their economic future. And I think in a lot of respects, a lot of Iranians are waking up to the fact that this regime just isn't keeping the promises that it's made over the last, 20, 30, 40 years. So I think people there are starting to wake up. And I think Iran has to be very careful about what it's trying to do, because it's just a bad actor. So
wow, it's so interesting to hear you set a bar in that country for a dictatorship. I mean, I would expect that bar to be pretty low anyway.
Yeah,
I mean, I would have people standing along the roadside saying they're not keeping their promises, but I hear you. Can we talk a little bit? I want to get back to the news that Benjamin Hall was telling us about just moments ago, because it is different when not just an ally but a friend in Israel hears from Iran, we're getting ready to attack you. And on May 12th, by the way, there's a deadline that the president may decertify the Iran deal. Talk to me about how those components go together and what we maybe need to do at this point to even reassure Israel.
Well, look, if the Iranians ever thought about attacking Israeli territory and a kinetic strike that is, attributed 100% to Iran, that would be near suicide for a lot of different reasons. I think first what the Israelis would do is say, well, there's no restrictions on us anymore from attacking what's there of Iran's nuclear program, and they probably wipe out large sections of it, which is, I don't think, something in the Iranian interest. I think what happens, Harris, a lot of times the Iranians talk big, they have all these grandiose ideas of what they can do and what their regional power is, and they're certainly a rogue state, but I don't think there's any way that Iran would attack Israel, because that would literally open Pandora's box for them, and Israel would strike and strike very aggressively, and the United States would most likely back that up and probably sell Israel all of our best bunker-busting bombs and things that could do a lot of damage to Iran's nuclear program. So that would be a big mistake.
I was fascinated by what you said in terms of why Iran might even do a side deal with some of these other countries. It's about security, but it's also about money.
Exactly.
Harry Kazianis, it's always great to see you. Thank you very much for the conversation.
Thanks for inviting me.
New developments in the standoff between Intelligence Chairman Devin Nunes and Attorney General Jeff Sessions. Why the congressman is threatening the AG with contempt of Congress. Judge Andrew Napolitano is about to scoot in. We'll talk about it. New details in the showdown between House Republicans and Attorney General Jeff Sessions. House Intel Chair Devin Nunes is warning he plans to urge lawmakers this week to hold Sessions in contempt of Congress for failing to hand over classified materials related to the Russia investigation. While not describing exactly what info he's seeking, the California Republican told Fox News why he means business.
2 weeks ago, we sent a letter to Attorney General Jeff Sessions, a classified letter. Per usual, it was ignored. Not acknowledged, just completely ignored. So last week we sent a subpoena, and then on Thursday we discovered that they are not going to comply with our subpoena.
So what are you going to do about it?
Very important information that we need.
So what are you going to do?
The only thing left that we can do is we have to move quickly to hold the Attorney General of the United States in contempt.
But Justice Department officials provided Fox News with a letter sent from the DOJ to Chairman Nunes 4 days ago, within the deadline for responding to a subpoena from his committee. That letter warns providing the info on a, quote, specific individual could pose grave implications for national security. The DOJ says in part, quote, disclosure of responsive information to such requests can risk severe consequences, including potential loss of human lives, damage to relationships with valued international partners, compromise of ongoing criminal investigations, and interference with intelligence activities. That's a long list. Let's bring in Fox News senior judicial analyst Judge Andrew Napolitano. Break it down. Can they say no, the DOJ? No, we're not going to give you this for all of those reasons I just listed.
Yes, they can say no. They probably should ask a judge to quash the subpoena.
Okay.
The judge will ask to see the documents, and the judge will decide which documents stay secret and which documents are revealed. But the DOJ has a couple of very sound answers, and Congressman Nunes has a great legitimate concern. First, the DOJ. They cannot provide materials about a criminal investigation that's ongoing without jeopardizing the investigation, and they cannot provide names of witnesses and sources to whom confidentiality and privacy have been promised. Where's that from? That's from the Federal Rules of Criminal Procedure, which Congress enacted. So Congress is subject to these as well. Those are the stated reasons. The unstated reason, the DOJ thinks that Congressman Nunes and his colleagues will take some of this raw material about an ongoing criminal investigation of the president and bring it to the White House.
Okay, but how can they prove that? They don't know.
Well,
How do you prove a thing that hasn't happened, Judge?
You insulate against it happening. That's the DOJ's argument. Congressman Nunes' argument is, wait a minute.
But Judge, if that were the case, that would mean no one would ever hand over anything.
The way to do it, if you or I were subpoenaed and we told them to take a hike, they'd come after us. They don't go after the Justice Department. They threaten contempt. The proper thing to do, as I said, is to have the court look at the actual documents and decide, on this the DOJ is right, on this the DOJ is wrong, I'm going to order it surrendered.
So,
but because they're the DOJ, because they're the king of the hill, they don't challenge it in court. They basically put it up to the Congress to challenge it. Now, holding Jeff Sessions in contempt is absurd. He is recused from the Russia investigation. The recusal is non-revocable. He can't do anything about it.
Well, we know it's non-revocable. The president isn't happy about it. If it were revocable, he'd probably revoke it.
Of course. But the person in charge of what they want is Rod Rosenstein. That's the person that they should be threatening with contempt. Now,
so why are they threatening? And by the way, talk to me a little bit about contempt of Congress. I mean,
you know, it stings and it doesn't sting. It's only happened once to an attorney general. Republican Congress held Democratic Attorney General Eric Holder in contempt for failure to turn over Fast and Furious documents.
Right.
Did it hurt his legal career? No. Did they take it one step farther and seek an incarceration, a confinement, until he coughed up the documents? No. It was just a paper holding of contempt.
Okay.
What has never happened is for a Republican Congress to hold a Republican Attorney General in contempt. The president doesn't want to get involved because he's the subject of an investigation by the DOJ, and he feels he shouldn't be interfering in any DOJ management. So this fight is just going to keep going back and forth.
Why is it happening Republican on Republican here? Oh, my goodness, I make it sound like a wrestling
match. There are people in the Justice Department who, though Republican, do not agree with the motivation of the House Intel Committee and fear that the Intel Committee will use raw intelligence data, some of which is gained at the risk of lives for political purposes. There are people on the Intel Committee who say, we run the budget, we're their regulator, they answer to us. Who are they to tell us we can't see anything?
All right, so, you know, just kind of piecing this together, you say the president could step in. He won't do that because of the ongoing investigation.
That's what he said.
Okay, but can he?
Yes, he can.
Okay, well, what does that look like?
And how quickly could that resolve? He could call up Rod Rosenstein and say, I am sick and tired of this stuff. Give the Congress what they want. Or take it to a judge and have the judge resolve it.
Do you think he'll do that?
I don't think he will. Because I think he wants to be able to say his hands are washed of the DOJ until the Mueller investigation is over.
Judge, I feel like I get a lot of
Well, we've gone through a lot in
advice.
3 minutes.
Thank you.
You're
Come back
welcome.
soon.
Pleasure.
A new showdown as Republicans gear up for some high-stakes Senate primaries tomorrow. President Trump is warning West Virginia Senate candidate Don Blankenship cannot win in the general election. And he's not the only one. The Power Panel, next.
I think the president is right here. He's leading. He's saying, let's be smart. Let's look long term. Let's not have these internal battles. Let's put the very best person forward that we can get a majority.
Leading the White House briefing as a heated battle continues over Gina Haspel, the president's pick to head the CIA. Are Democrats opposing the possible first female CIA chief because she was too tough? Plus, new reaction from Republican Senate hopefuls in West Virginia, including the guy who's leading in the polls, but the president says, no way. It's part of Midterm Monday on the Daily Briefing.
And speaking of Gina Haspel, she's meeting with senators ahead of confirmation hearing on Wednesday, and we just caught, and we may be able to re-rack that a little bit, she was just arriving on the Hill. We are told that she will be talking with Senators Heinrich of New Mexico, Manchin of West Virginia, and Feinstein of California on the list today, but arriving today ahead of her Wednesday hearing for confirmation to lead the CIA. We've been talking this hour with guests about what it will be like inside that confirmation hearing, what she will be asked about, and some of the criticism from the left that they can't support her, they're saying, some Democrats, because they don't like her history in black sites and interrogation movement that she was part of retroactively with the CIA. And of course, let's bring this out and have the panel talk about it. I would love that. Lisa Booth, Senior Fellow for Independent Women's Voice and a Fox News contributor back from Outnumbered, and Brad Gersman, Democratic strategy and attorney. So, you know, I was just explaining to the audience, Lisa, because we talked about this last hour, that you know, part of her confirmation, though, will be on her 30 years of service. And so the president saying you want to be tough on her because she was tough on terrorists. How disingenuous.
Well, and I like the framing, the way that President Trump is framing this. And if I'm also President Trump, I'm pretty angry still about John Tesser's railroading of Ronnie Jackson. And so if I'm President Trump, I would take that to these Democrats running for re-election, particularly in these 5 states where he won by double digits, and really put their feet to the fire regarding this confirmation hearing and saying, look, these Democrats need to support her. Again, she's been in the CIA since 1985. She's got all these former CIA directors and individuals in the Intelligence Committee supporting her, saying she is the right woman for the job. So I think he's got a very strong case to make for her.
Well, and I would toss this out, too. You know, John Brennan went through, and he was much farther up the top with the same interrogation program. He went through this process and got confirmed. What are your thoughts about what happens on Wednesday and where Democrats really stand on this?
Well, Democrats have a right to ask questions.
Everybody has a right to ask questions.
They have a right to ask tough questions. And they have a right to try to uncover the truth, the accuracy, and an understanding of what this person is about. This is a very important job, needless to say. If we don't have the two sides arguing over nominees and picks, then we don't have a democracy. And the Democrats are doing exactly what they've been elected to do by their own constituents.
No.
This is not something that is out of the norm. It's not something that is extreme. It's not something that's not going on all the time. Sure. It's partisan politics to some extent. But these senators are there to ask questions.
Does she get confirmed?
Yes.
Lisa?
I think so. I hope so. But they are there to ask tough questions, but they're not there to railroad someone unnecessarily. So, like they did with Ronnie Jackson. And here's the thing.
Ronnie Jackson deserved to be railroaded.
Hold on. Here's the thing as well. You look at Mike Pompeo, and you had Democrats who supported him as CIA director and then turning around and voting against him for Secretary of State. I'm sorry, but that is purely political. And if I'm Gina Haspel, I go in there and talk about the fact of, you know, look at my record, look at all these individuals in the Intelligence Committee supporting me. We're at a critical time right now in this country, dealing with North Korea, dealing with
But
Iran.
she does have to answer the questions, though.
Sure,
and
she
you know,
should be prepared, and I'm sure she will be.
So here's the irony, and you and I were talking about this on the couch earlier. So you have a woman up for this position, and the president tweeted about, you know, Democrats being upset because she was too tough on terror. You know, your side of the aisle has carried the banner on women, 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 and I agree with you. All the tough questions. I want to know as much as we can know about those sites and everything, too. But still, you think she will be confirmed?
Yes, she will. And this isn't a woman or man thing.
It shouldn't be.
So this is a qualification thing, and it's easy now.
Is she qualified in your eyes?
I need to hear the answers to the questions. I mean, look, we can't all just sit here. Everyone always sounds qualified. It sounds great in the lead up to one of these hearings because we're all the only thing we know.
No, I'm
what
asking if he thinks.
And I want to hear the answers to the questions,
okay?
You. Because that's when you uncover the truth. You don't make a decision on a trial before you hear the evidence.
But she wouldn't have gotten to where she is currently if she was not qualified for the job. Certainly there's going to be questions over her time in the CIA.
Yeah, let's be honest,
but on the question
some of the nominees,
she's qualified,
with all due respect, some of the
it's
nominees,
ridiculous to say that she isn't qualified.
With all due respect, some of the nominees that have been placed forward, by this administration, have not been qualified. And there are things that we find out
like
later
Pompeo?
after the hearing. Mike Pompeo rightfully got his position.
I will say it is kind of funny, and Harris, you brought this point up earlier, how the administration and Sarah Sanders is now couching this as, look, all these liberal, feminist, women empowerment, if you don't support her, she's the first female CIA director ever to be nominated, would be the first one if confirmed. But
my point was they can't treat her any differently than they treated John Brennan. And when you look at her 30 years service, that would be the argument. But what I hear you saying is that Democrats are going to work to confirm her. By the way, she's meeting with Manchin right now of West Virginia. So we will follow the news as it happens. Stay close.